The man her father chose for her was 63 years old. Zuri Okafor found that out the same night. Her father looked her in the eye and said the surgery money was contingent on her cooperation. He didn't call it blackmail. He called it a family arrangement. His new wife stood behind him in a silk robe, watching Zuri the way you watch something unpleasant tracked in from outside. The daughter, Priya, 19, bored, was picking at her nail polish on the white couch. "You don't even know this man," Zuri said. "He knows what he wants," her father said. "And right now, what he wants is saving your grandmother's life." If you've ever been handed a choice that isn't really a choice, if you've ever felt the walls close in while someone smiled at you, then you already know what Zuri felt standing in that penthouse. Drop a like. Tell me what city you're watching from, because this story is traveling somewhere, and I want to know how far. Stay until the end. You will not see this coming. The train left Atlanta at 9:40 in the evening, and Zuri was running late. She made it through the doors with 40 seconds to spare, her duffel bag swinging against her hip, her grandmother's rosary beads wrapped twice around her wrist because she'd grabbed them off the nightstand without thinking and hadn't taken them off since. The platform lights dropped away behind the window. She found her seat, a window spot in the second-to-last car, pressed her forehead against the cold glass, and let herself breathe for the first time in 3 days. The call from her father had come on a Tuesday. She hadn't heard his voice in 6 years. He'd opened with, "I heard about your grandmother." No hello. No apology for the 6 years. Just that, clipped, formal, like she was a business contact he'd mislaid. Her grandmother, Eleanor Okafor, had a heart that was giving out by degrees. The cardiologist at Grover Memorial had used the phrase deteriorating rapidly and then handed Zuri a number that felt fictional. $214,000. The surgery was scheduled, the slot was held, but the deposit was due in 11 days. Zuri had $1,700 in her checking account and a waitressing job that paid her enough to keep the lights on in the apartment she shared with her grandmother in a town that had more churches than traffic lights. Her father, Winston Hayes, legally changed. The name Okafor, apparently something he'd shed along with his first family, had told her to come to New York. He had the money. He'd help. She didn't believe him. She knew better than to believe him. But she didn't have another move, so she bought the cheapest ticket on the overnight Amtrak and told her grandmother she was going to visit a friend. Her grandmother had looked at her over her reading glasses and said, "Baby, I raised you. I know when you're lying." Zuri hadn't answered that. She'd just kissed her on the forehead and carried her bag to the door. The train car was half empty, an older man with a crossword puzzle, a young mother wrestling a toddler into a coat, 2 college kids with earbuds in, already asleep. Zuri pulled out her phone, checked her bank balance like checking it again might change the number, then put the phone away. She pressed her back against the seat and closed her eyes. She was almost asleep when she heard the sound. It came from the space between cars, that rattling metal corridor where the cars connect, where the floor shakes and the noise from the tracks doubles back on itself. A sound like something heavy being dragged. Then a voice, low, exhaling hard. Not quite a groan. Something more controlled than that, like someone trained to swallow pain and almost succeeding. Zuri opened her eyes. The other passengers hadn't moved. The crossword man was still working his puzzle. The mother had finally gotten the coat on the toddler. Zuri stood up. Later, she would not be able to explain it cleanly. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't even courage, exactly. Courage implies you understand the danger, and she didn't. It was closer to the thing her grandmother had, this stubborn, unglamorous refusal to look away from something that needed attending to. Eleanor Okafor had pulled 3 strangers out of a flooded drainage ditch during a storm in 1987. She'd never once called it brave. She'd said, "They needed somebody, and I was there." Zuri walked to the connector door, pushed through it, and stopped. The man was sitting on the floor in the space between cars, his back against the steel wall, one leg stretched out and the other bent at the knee. He was Korean, mid-30s, with a face that would have been striking under normal circumstances. Sharp jaw, strong brow, the kind of bone structure that looked like it had been designed by someone who took the work seriously. Under these circumstances, his face was the color of old wax, and there was blood soaking through his left side in a slow, spreading stain that had already reached the bottom of his white dress shirt. He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, focused, even through the pain. That was the thing that threw her, the steadiness in them, like whatever was happening to his body was happening to someone else, and he was simply observing. "Go back to your seat," he said. His English was clear, accented but precise. Zuri's brain ran a fast inventory. Blood, a lot of it, shirt soaked through. He'd been pressing his hand against the wound and the hand was dark to the wrist. The train was moving at full speed. They were 40 minutes from the last stop and likely an hour from the next. "No," she said. Something shifted in his face. It wasn't gratitude. It was more like recalibration, like a man who had arranged all his expectations and she'd just walked through them without noticing. "I said go back." "I heard what you said." She was already pulling off her cardigan, crouching down. "You've got a stab wound or a gunshot. I can't tell which, and I'm not going to ask right now. Either way, you're going to bleed out in the next 30 minutes if nobody does something, and right now I'm the only somebody here." She pressed the bald cardigan against his side. He made a sound, sharp, involuntary, and then immediately suppressed. His jaw went tight. "Press down on that," Zuri said. "Hard. Put your hand over mine and push." He did. His hand was large, cold, and when it covered hers, she felt him apply pressure with practiced steadiness, like a man who'd been hurt before and knew how to cooperate with the treatment even while hating it. "What is your name?" he said. "Zuri." "Zuri." He said it like he was logging it somewhere. "You should not be here. Tell me something I don't know." She was looking at the wound now, pulling the edge of the cardigan back for a half-second to assess. Gunshot. Entry wound on the left side, high on the ribs. If it had hit a lung, he'd be worse than this. His breathing was labored but not liquid. She didn't know if the bullet was still in him. "Do you have a phone?" "No." "Did someone take it?" He didn't answer. "Do you have people on this train? Someone looking for you, or someone who can help you?" The pause before he spoke was just long enough to tell her the answer was complicated. "Someone is looking for me," he said. "They are not the kind who will help." The train rocked. Somewhere behind them a door opened and closed, and Zuri felt him go still. Not the stillness of weakness, but the stillness of a man cataloging a threat. His eyes moved past her toward the car door. His body, whatever damage it had sustained, had not fully communicated this to his instincts. "How many?" she said quietly. He looked at her. That same recalibration behind his eyes. "2," he said. "Maybe 3. "And they're on the train." "Yes." Zuri looked at the thin metal walls around them, the noise of the tracks, the small space with nowhere to go. Then she pulled her phone out of her pocket. "I'm calling the train crew." He moved faster than she expected. His hand closed around her wrist, not crushing but firm, stopping the motion. "Do not. If I don't get you help, if you call anyone on this train, those men will know exactly where I am. You will also be in the car when they find me." His voice stayed even. "I'm trying to keep you out of this." Zuri looked at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. "You're bleeding on my only cardigan, and you're trying to keep me out of this." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It had the shape of one, but hadn't committed. "You are very unusual." "I've been told." She kept the pressure on the wound. "What do we do?" He thought for a moment. Whatever calculations he was running, they were fast. "There is a service compartment 3 cars forward, maintenance access. If I can get there before they sweep this car, can you walk?" "I can function." "That's not what I asked." "I can walk," he said. And the way he said it told her it would cost him, and he had already decided to pay it. They moved. Zuri took most of his weight on her right side, his arm across her shoulders, her hand still gripping the cardigan against his ribs. He was heavier than he looked, the kind of solid that comes from something other than the gym, denser, built under conditions she didn't want to think about too closely. He kept his breathing controlled, but she could feel the effort of it, the way each step made his body brace slightly. They made it through the first connector. The second car was empty. The third had a handful of passengers, and Zuri walked steadily, eyes forward, steering him toward the far door like they were simply a couple navigating a crowded space. Nobody looked up. That was the thing about people. They didn't want to see problems. She had learned that early. The service compartment was a narrow metal closet with cleaning supplies and folded emergency blankets. She got him inside, pulled the door shut, found the emergency blankets and pressed 2 of them against the wound on top of the ruined cardigan. Put your hand back, she said. He put his hand back. The space was very small. They were close enough that she could see the individual beads of sweat at his temple and the line of his jaw working as he held back some expression she couldn't read. You haven't asked who I am, he said. I'll ask when we're not hiding from people who want you dead. He was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, footsteps moved past the door. Steady, deliberate, not the random shuffle of a passenger looking for the bathroom. Both of them stopped breathing. The footsteps paused. Zuri counted her own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The footsteps moved on. She exhaled slowly. He turned his head slightly to look at her. You are not afraid, he said. It came out like an accusation. I'm terrified, Zuri said. What does being terrified have to do with anything? He studied her face in the dim light leaking under the door. Something in his expression shifted. Not the recalibration she'd seen before, something slower, less tactical, more complicated. Tae-jun, he said. My name is Kang Tae-jun. She filed the name away. It meant nothing to her yet. In an hour it would mean everything, but right now she was counting his pulse through her fingers, where they gripped his arm, and the count was bad enough that she was doing math about how much time they had left. Okay, Tae-jun, she said. How long until this train stops? 47 minutes. Can you last 47 minutes? He looked at her steadily. Yes. You don't seem like you're lying, so I'm going to take that at face value. She adjusted her grip on the blanket against his side. The blood had soaked through the cardigan entirely and was beginning to darken the first blanket. Talk to me. It keeps people awake. What do you want me to talk about? Anything. Where you're from. What you do. She paused. Actually, maybe not what you do. That almost smile again. I am from Busan, originally, a city in the south of Korea. I've never been. It is on the water. The sea there is a different color than what I see in New York. He stopped, steadied his breathing. What is Zuri from? My grandmother named me. It means beautiful in Swahili. She'd read it in a book when she was 19 and never forgot it. And where is your grandmother now? Georgia. Zuri watched his face. The color was marginally better. The pressure was helping. She's sick. That's why I'm on this train. You are going to New York because of her? I'm going to New York to ask my father for money. She heard how it sounded when she said it out loud. He has it. Whether he gives it to me is a different question. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Your father does not give you things willingly. It wasn't a question. She glanced at him. How'd you figure that? The way you said it. Ask my father for money. You do not say it like someone expecting yes. He shifted slightly, a barely suppressed wince crossing his face. You say it like a woman who has already accepted the fight. Zuri didn't answer immediately. The accuracy of it caught her somewhere off guard. My grandmother needs a surgery, she said finally. $200,000. I don't have it. He does. He told me to come. She looked down at her hands. So I came. And if he says no, then I figure something else out. She said it firmly, too firmly. I always figure something else out. Outside, another set of footsteps. These were different, two people, and they stopped outside the compartment door. Zuri and Tae-jun both went motionless. The handle rattled once, testing. Then a voice, low and speaking in Korean, words she couldn't understand. She looked at Tae-jun. His face had gone absolutely still, expression evacuated. Whatever had been human about it a moment ago had closed behind something harder. He reached into his jacket with his free hand and produced a small, flat knife. He pressed it into Zuri's palm, closing her fingers around the handle. His eyes met hers. She stared at him. He held her gaze and shook his head, very slightly. Not yet. Wait. The voices outside the door murmured back and forth. Then footsteps again, moving away down the corridor. Zuri realized she was gripping the knife hard enough to leave marks on her palm. She loosened her hand. They will check again, Tae-jun said, voice barely above a breath. When the train slows approaching the station, they will make another pass. How many minutes? Perhaps 20. Then we have 20 minutes to figure out how you walk off this train. He looked at her with something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not the measuring look from before. Quieter than that. Why are you doing this? He said. It wasn't rhetorical. He actually wanted to know. Zuri thought about her grandmother's hands, the way Eleanor Okafor could diagnose the moral weight of a moment in about 3 seconds and respond to it before most people had finished thinking. Because you needed somebody, Zuri said, and I was here. The train began its gradual deceleration. The lights outside the small crack at the base of the door shifted from black to the scattered orange of approaching city sprawl. New York, 40 miles of lit-up urgency bearing down on them. Tae-jun was looking at her with an expression she still couldn't categorize. When we get off this train, he said slowly, you will go your way and I will go mine. You will not look for me. You will not speak of this. He paused. And you will be safe. Is that you giving me orders? It is me trying to protect you. I didn't ask to be protected. No, he said. You did not. Something moved behind his eyes. That is why I want to. The deceleration deepened. Somewhere far back in the train, a door slammed. The men were starting their sweep. Zuri looked at the knife in her hand, at the man bleeding slowly against the wall beside her, at the city lights widening outside. Okay, she said. Here's what we're going to do. She didn't have a plan that was good exactly, but she had one. And she'd learned early that a bad plan executed with conviction beats a perfect plan you haven't started yet. She handed him back the knife. Put that away. You're too hurt to use it without telegraphing. If they come through that door, I'll be the one who opens it, and I need them to see a confused woman who took a wrong turn, not a man with a blade. He took the knife, eyes on her. Can you stand up straight? Like actually straight? He got to his feet. It cost him. He did it anyway. Your jacket covers the blood on your side, she said, pulling it closed over the stain. Keep your arm down. Walk like you're annoyed, not injured. Annoyed men hold their body differently. You know a great deal about this. I worked a neighborhood bar for 2 years. I know what every kind of hurt looks like and how men hide it. She straightened his collar with hands that were steadier than she felt. Stay half a step behind me. Let me talk. He looked at her for one long moment. Then, you are very unusual, Zuri. You said that already. It bears repeating. She opened the compartment door and walked out into the corridor like she owned it, and Tae-jun followed, and the train rolled into Penn Station with its noise and its light and its 10,000 people who would never know what had moved through them that night. They made it to the platform. The men who'd been searching came through the car behind them and stopped, scanning faces, and Zuri turned toward Tae-jun and said something meaningless about the weather in a voice loud enough to carry, and he looked down at her the way she needed him to look, not like a man bleeding out, but like a man entirely occupied with the woman in front of him. The searchers moved on. On the platform, surrounded by the chaos of Penn Station at midnight, 3 black SUVs materialized from the tunnel access road like they'd been conjured. Men in dark clothing moved quickly, forming a perimeter, and Zuri understood then, watching it happen, that she had spent the last 47 minutes keeping alive a man who commanded small armies. One of his men reached Tae-jun first, speaking rapidly in Korean, and Tae-jun answered in the same language while his eyes stayed on Zuri, who was already being moved toward the vehicles, already being absorbed back into something enormous that she'd had no idea she was adjacent to. He stopped, turned back. Zuri. He said her name like he was confirming she was still real. What is your father's name in New York? She blinked. Winston Hayes, why? Go, he said. And then his men were moving again, and she watched him get into the vehicle, saw the door close on his pale face and dark eyes, and watched the 3 black SUVs disappear into the city. She stood on the platform with blood drying on her hands and her ruined cardigan and the rosary beads her grandmother had given her, and she had no idea what any of it meant yet. She found out later, 3 days later, buried in a news item her phone surfaced because she'd been searching Korean Organized Crime New York at 2 a.m. in her father's guest bathroom, unable to sleep, that Kang Tae-jun was not merely a powerful man. He was the name people said carefully in certain rooms. The man whose name appeared in federal documents under the heading Known Syndicate Leadership, and then disappeared from subsequent filings because the evidence kept becoming unavailable. The man 3 separate district attorneys had attempted to prosecute and 3 separate district attorneys had quietly stopped attempting. He controlled import networks, real estate, and the kind of invisible infrastructure that made things move without anyone being able to say exactly how. And he told her to go her way. She had tried to. She'd gone to her father's penthouse the morning after the train. She'd stood in his pristine entry hall and watched him look her over the way you assess furniture you're considering returning. His wife, Camille, had offered her coffee in a tone that made clear the offer was rhetorical. Her half-sister Priya had appeared briefly on the upper landing and then evaporated without speaking. Her father had listened to her explain about her grandmother's surgery. He'd nodded several times. He'd looked genuinely sorrowful. Then he'd introduced her to a man named Gerald Finch. Gerald Finch was 63, wide across the shoulders, with the red-faced confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in most rooms. He'd shaken her hand and held it a half-second too long, and her father had watched this happen with satisfaction. That night, after she'd understood what was being offered and at what price, Zuri had sat in the guest room with her grandmother's rosary beads in both hands and thought about the man bleeding on the train floor. The man who had said, "Go your way." She'd intended to. She really had. But the walls, as it turned out, were already closing. The morning after her father introduced her to Gerald Finch, Zuri woke up before 6 and lay on the guest room ceiling staring at nothing for a long time. The room was beautiful. Of course it was. Everything in Winston Hayes' penthouse was beautiful in that particular way that expensive things were beautiful. Surfaces that had never been touched by anything difficult. Corners without scuff marks. Art on the walls that had been selected by someone whose job was selecting art. The sheets had a thread count that felt like a personal insult given the circumstances. She got up, washed her face, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, the kind of looking where you're not admiring anything, just checking to see if you're still there. She was still there. She'd called her grandmother the night before, kept it short, said she was getting settled. Eleanor had asked if she'd eaten. Zuri had said yes. Eleanor had said, "Don't lie to me on top of everything else." And then, more quietly, "How bad is it, baby?" Zuri had said, "I'll handle it." And Eleanor had been silent for a moment and then said, "I know you will. That's what worries me." Zuri went to the kitchen at 6:15 and found Camille already there. Camille Hayes was 44, the second kind of beautiful, maintained, engineered, the result of daily effort and significant expenditure. She was in a cream silk robe with her coffee and her phone, and she looked up when Zuri came in with the expression of someone who'd been expecting an unpleasant errand and was now getting around to it. "Sleep well?" Camille said. "Fine." Zuri moved to the coffee maker, found a mug, kept her movements economy-sized. "Don't take up space. Don't give her anything to work with." "Gerald called this morning." Camille's voice was conversational, pleasant the way things are pleasant when the pleasantness is doing a job. "He was very taken with you." Zuri poured her coffee. "That's not really a two-way street." A pause. "You should think carefully about what you're walking away from." "I haven't walked away from anything yet." Zuri turned around, leaned against the counter, looked at her directly. Camille had clear gray eyes that gave away nothing, which Zuri now recognized as a form of aggression. "And I'd appreciate it if the next conversation about Gerald Finch involved my father actually in the room." Winston finds these conversations uncomfortable. Winston can be uncomfortable. Camille set her phone down, just slightly, a degree of attention that meant she was recalibrating. "Your father has worked very hard to build what we have here." "What my mother built," Zuri said. "Let's be accurate." The temperature in the kitchen dropped about 4 degrees. Camille picked her phone back up. "Breakfast is handled by the service. They arrive at 8. She stood, adjusted her robe, and left the kitchen without looking back. Zuri stood alone with her coffee and the ambient sound of a city waking up 32 floors below her. The coffee was excellent. She drank it and thought about how much she hated this apartment. Her father appeared at 8:30 after the breakfast service had come and gone. He was dressed for the office, crisp and unreachable, and he sat across from Zuri at the dining table with the posture of a man who had rehearsed something. "I want you to understand the situation," he said. "I want that too." He looked at her sharply. She returned it without expression. "Finch Capital is one of our largest investors," he said. "Gerald is 63 years old. An established partner who has expressed personal interest in buying a wife." Zuri set her cup down. "Say the actual thing, Winston." He flinched at the name. Good. She'd used it deliberately. "This is not—" He stopped. Restarted. You don't understand the kind of position we're in. No, you don't understand mine. She leaned forward. My grandmother needs surgery. $214,000. You said on the phone you would help. That was the agreement. I'm here. I showed up. Now I'm asking you to do what you said. Winston looked at the table. There was something in his face that she might have read as shame if she'd known him better. She didn't know him well enough to be sure. He could have been calculating. He could have been performing. The funds are not as liquid as I indicated, he said. How illiquid? There are conditions. The word landed like a dropped weight. Zuri heard it and felt something settle in her chest, some terrible calm that came from having her worst expectation confirmed. The marriage to Gerald, Winston began, is not happening. She said it flat, no heat, just statement of fact. Zuri, I said it is not happening. He looked at her for a long moment, then, you have 11 days before that surgery slot is forfeited. Where else are you going to find that money? She had no answer for that. They both knew it. He was counting on it. She pushed her chair back and left the table, and Winston didn't call after her, because Winston Hayes had never once in his life chased anything that was walking away from him. She spent the next 3 days making calls. The hospital, first. Could the surgery be postponed? Could they negotiate a payment plan? The administrator was sympathetic, genuinely so, which somehow made it worse. The surgical team's availability window was narrow. The slot had been held as a courtesy. 8 days now. She called every person she could think of, former coworkers, old family friends, her grandmother's church community back in Georgia. People who would help if they could, but whose capacity was in the low hundreds, not the hundreds of thousands. She applied for 3 medical loans online and was declined by 2 within the hour. The third asked for collateral she didn't have. She sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the penthouse on the 3rd day, her notebook full of dead ends, and felt for the first time the specific texture of a wall you can't get around. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Yes, she said. Miss Okafor. The voice was male, professionally neutral. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Kang. He asks if you are well. She sat up. Excuse me? Mr. Kang Tae-jun. He has asked after your well-being. She looked at her phone screen like it had become something else. How did you get this number? Mr. Kang would like you to know that if you require assistance, he is available to provide it. Her heart was doing something complicated. Tell Mr. Kang that I appreciate the call and that I don't need assistance. A brief pause. He anticipated that response. He asked me to also inform you that your father's company is currently under financial review by 3 separate regulatory bodies and that the situation may deteriorate further in the coming weeks. Zuri gripped the phone harder. He's watching my father. Mr. Kang watches many things. Tell him to mind his own business. She hung up. She sat with her cold coffee and her notebook and her shaking hands, and she thought, who is this man, and how did he get into every corner of my life in 72 hours? She found out the next morning. She was in the elevator heading down to the lobby when it stopped on the 28th floor, and a woman got on. Mid-50s, Korean, dressed with the kind of quiet authority that didn't announce itself. She looked at Zuri once, the way experienced people look at you, comprehensive, unhurried, and then looked forward. You are Zuri Okafor, the woman said. Zuri tensed. Who are you? My name is Mrs. Park. I work for a family you have already encountered. The elevator continued its descent. I came to give you information that I believe you should have. If Tae-jun sent you, he did not. He would be unhappy that I am here, Mrs. Park didn't look particularly concerned about Tae-jun's happiness. Your father's company owes Gerald Finch approximately $40 million. This debt has been accumulating for 2 years. The arrangement they have proposed, your marriage to Gerald, is not a family decision. It is a business restructuring. Gerald Finch does not wish for a wife. He wishes for leverage. A Hayes family member in his household gives him a permanent instrument of control over your father's assets, including the assets that were formerly your mother's. The elevator reached the lobby. Neither of them moved. My mother's assets, Zuri said. Your mother, Diana Okafor Hayes, built a textile import business from 1994 to 2008. When she died, the business transferred to your father as surviving spouse. Its current value is approximately $90 million. Mrs. Park looked at her evenly. Your father has used it as collateral for his debt to Gerald Finch. If that debt is called, Finch acquires the business. Your father's arrangement with you is an attempt to prevent that. The lobby doors were open. People moved through the entrance around them. Why are you telling me this? Zuri said. Because you helped someone who matters to people who matter to me. Mrs. Park moved toward the exit, then paused. Mr. Kang will not force your hand. That is not how he operates. But he would like you to understand that you are already in this situation, regardless of his involvement. The question is only whether you navigate it with information or without. She walked out into the street and didn't look back. Zuri stood in the lobby of her father's building and felt the floor shift slightly under her feet. Not physically, but in the way facts rearranged the ground. Her mother's business. $90 million, $40 million in debt. A 63-year-old man who wanted leverage more than company. She went back upstairs. She found her father in his study, and she closed the door behind her, and the conversation that followed was the most honest one they had probably ever had. Honest in the way an argument is honest, undefended, and ugly. Mom's business, she said. You used it as collateral. He didn't deny it. That surprised her. He looked up from his desk, and the rehearsed quality was gone from his face, replaced by something older and more tired. It was necessary. It was hers. It was mine. You had no... It was legally mine after she died, Zuri. Whatever you think of that, it was legal. I don't care about legal. I care about right. She put her hands on his desk and leaned in. You took everything she built and you gambled it on your own ambition, and now you're trying to sell me to fix it. I am trying to... don't. Her voice cracked slightly on the word, and she hated that. Hated the evidence of feeling. Don't tell me what you're trying to do. You tried to make me invisible for 6 years. You tried to make Mom's memory convenient. Now you're trying to use her granddaughter as a transaction. She straightened up. I am not a transaction. Winston Hayes looked at his daughter across the mahogany desk. He looked for just a moment like a man who understood exactly what he was. And then the moment closed, and the familiar, careful expression returned. You have 7 days, he said, for the surgery. She left the study. In the hallway outside, she leaned against the wall and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stood very still until the shaking stopped. Her phone buzzed. Noah. Noah Brooks had been in her life since they were teenagers. He was from home. From the same small Georgia town, the same summer heat, the same cramped beauty of a place that couldn't hold the people who were meant for somewhere else. They'd been engaged for a year, loosely, in the way young couples are engaged when they're still figuring out who they are. He was in Atlanta doing construction management work, and he called her every few days, and she answered because hearing his voice felt like the closest thing to ground she had right now. Hey, she said. How's it going up there? His voice was warm, unhurried. Noah had always moved at his own pace, which she'd once loved and occasionally found maddening. It's complicated. Your dad being difficult? My dad is... She stopped, looked down the hallway at the closed study door. Yeah, he's being difficult. Come home. I can't come home, Noah. I don't have the money yet. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way. We've been over this. She pushed off the wall, moved toward the guest room. I just need a few more days. A pause. Zuri, you don't have to do this alone. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed. I know I don't. Then let me come up there. No, stay where you are. She closed her eyes. I'll figure this out. After she hung up, she sat in the quiet of the guest room and thought about that. I'll figure this out. She'd been saying it her whole life. She'd been saying it since she was 12 years old, and her mother was gone, and her father had looked at his grief and decided the solution was distance. She'd been saying it through community college and bar shifts, and every closed door that led to another closed door. She was good at figuring things out. She was less good at admitting when the wall was actually a wall. Her phone rang again. Same unknown number as before. She answered it. Miss Okafor. The same neutral voice. Mr. Kang is available this evening, if you would like to speak with him. She should have said no. Every reasonable part of her brain assembled an argument for saying no. But her grandmother had 7 days, and the wall was there, and she was tired. Where? She said. The restaurant was not what she expected. She'd built something in her mind based on the black SUVs and the small armies. Something showing off, something designed to impress or intimidate. Instead, it was a Korean restaurant on a side street in Koreatown, small, with fogged-up windows and the smell of charcoal and fermented things. The kind of place where the menu had photographs and the tables had seen 30 years of use. Tae-jun was already there. He looked different, not entirely. The bone structure was the same, the steadiness in the eyes, but different in the way people look when they're not in the middle of something lethal. He was in a dark sweater, no jacket. His left side, she noticed automatically, was held slightly carefully. He'd seated himself with his back to the wall and a clear sight line to the door, which was not the behavior of someone who had stopped being cautious, so much as someone who was cautious at a lower volume. He stood when she arrived. She was briefly annoyed by the gesture. It was courteous in a way that made it harder to be cold. She sat. He sat. "You look better," she said. "You look worse," he said. No cruelty in it, just observation. 3 days of my father's hospitality. I know. He poured tea into her cup without asking. I'm sorry. Are you sorry, or are you responsible? He met her eyes. Both. She was quiet for a moment, deciding how to approach it. Your person told me my father's company has regulatory problems. Yes. Problems you created. Problems I accelerated. He set the teapot down. They existed. I made them visible. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because your father intended to use you to solve a problem that is not yours to solve. I wanted his options to narrow. The directness of it caught her. Most men, confronted with that question in that context, would find a way to soften what they'd done. Tae-jun simply told her. So you interfered in my life, she said. Yes. I didn't ask for that. No. I told your person I didn't need help. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. He picked up his own cup. I will not pretend it was something other than what it was. I made a decision that affected your situation without your consent. I would rather be honest about that than defend it. Zuri looked at him. The restaurant noise moved around them. Low conversations, the sound of the kitchen, someone laughing near the window. Normal city sounds. Why are you interested in me? She said. Not flirtatiously, clinically. She wanted a real answer. He took his time with it. On the train, you had every reason to walk past that door. It would have been rational. Most people who are reasonable and careful, walk past that door. He looked at his cup. You didn't. And then when I told you to go, you didn't do that either. And when you didn't know if we would make it off that train, you thought faster and more clearly than most people I have worked with. He looked up at her. I have been in this business for 15 years. I can count on one hand the number of people who have made me feel like... He paused. The pause was unusual on him. Like my situation was something being handled. Zuri absorbed that. I'm a waitress from Georgia, she said. I know what you are. It was not dismissive. I know what I am as well. What does a man like you want from a woman like me? He was quiet for a moment, then, I want to pay for your grandmother's surgery. She'd expected it. She still felt the ground tilt. No strings, he continued. No arrangement. No obligation. She gets the best cardiac team in the country. I have relationships with 3 hospitals that can have her transferred and in surgery within 48 hours. He held her gaze. I am telling you this as a person who owes you something. You kept me alive on that train. This is equivalent in my understanding of the world. And then what? And then nothing. You go home. Your grandmother recovers. You live your life. She studied him for a long moment. You really think it's that simple? No. He said it without hesitation. I think nothing involving your father's situation is simple. I think Gerald Finch will not release his claim on your mother's business simply because you refuse the arrangement. I think your father will continue to need a solution, and you will continue to be the most convenient one he has. He set down his cup. I am telling you what I can offer. The rest is your decision. Zuri sat with that. With the tea going cold in her hands and the 7 days she didn't have, and her grandmother's voice on the phone saying she knew she was lying about having eaten. My fiancé, she said. I have a fiancé. I know. Noah. We've been together for years. I know. And you're still... I'm offering to help your grandmother. I'm not asking you to choose anything. He looked at her without maneuvering. Whatever you decide, decide it clearly. I will not misrepresent what I'm doing. She set her cup down, looked at the table, at the worn wood surface and the ring marks from 1,000 cups before hers. Let me think, she said. Take whatever time you need. She left the restaurant before him, walked 6 blocks in the December cold with her coat not quite buttoned, processing. The city moved around her in its enormous, indifferent way, all that noise and motion that had nothing to do with her problem. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her grandmother's doctor. She knew before she answered. Miss Okafor, I'm sorry to be calling at this hour. We've had a development. She stood on the sidewalk with traffic moving beside her and listened to words like secondary event, an accelerated timeline, and the surgery window has narrowed considerably. And by the time the call was over, she had 5 days instead of 7, and the secondary event meant the cost had added another 30,000 to the number. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer. Then she called the unknown number. It rang once. Miss Okafor, the neutral voice said. Tell Mr. Kang I'm ready to talk, she said. Tonight, all of it. She hung up before the voice could respond and stood in the cold while the city went on around her. And she thought about her grandmother's hands teaching her to braid, about her mother's voice reading to her when she was small, about Noah on the phone saying come home like it was something she was still allowed to do. She thought about a man bleeding on a train floor who had looked up at her with the steadiest eyes she'd ever seen on someone who should have been terrified. She started walking. When she reached the restaurant again, it was still lit and Tae-jun was still there, standing now, his coat over one arm, clearly in the process of leaving. He saw her come through the door and went still. She walked to the table and sat back down in the same chair. He sat across from her. My grandmother has 5 days, she said. The cost is now 247,000, and I need you to understand something before you say anything. She put both hands flat on the table. I am not agreeing to anything other than help for my grandmother. I am not agreeing to a relationship. I am not agreeing to be managed or owned or positioned. If you try to turn this into something else, I will walk out of whatever room we're in, and I will not walk back in. He met her eyes and did not blink. Understood. And I want to know what you actually want from this. Not the polite answer, the real one. A long pause. The restaurant had emptied around them. The kitchen had gone quieter. I want to know you better, he said. It came out simply, without adornment. That is honest. I want to know what kind of person walks through a door like that. I want to... He stopped, looked at the table briefly. I have been surrounded by people who are afraid of me for a long time. You were never afraid. And I do not know what to do with that, but I know that I am not ready to stop being around it. Zuri looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, help my grandmother. I'll let you do that. She met his eyes. I'm not saying anything else yet. He nodded. She stood up, picked up her bag, stopped. There's a man named Gerald Finch, she said. My father owes him $40 million. The collateral is my mother's business. I know. Is that something you can... Yes. She stood there. How? There are ways to acquire debt, he said, that are less visible than money. She didn't ask him to explain. She understood, in a general way, that understanding exactly what Tae-jun meant was something she could choose not to do, that there was a line and she was already standing very close to it. Don't hurt anyone, she said. He looked at her. Gerald Finch has done things that would adjust your concern for his well-being. I'm not concerned about his well-being. I'm concerned about what it means if I walk away from this knowing that someone got hurt because I needed help. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Then, financial injury only. That's enough. She left. The cold air hit her, and she walked 3 blocks before she realized she was moving faster than usual, the kind of pace that comes when something has been decided and your body knows before your mind does that there is no reversing it. She called her father when she got back to the penthouse. He was in the study. He picked up on the second ring. I'm not marrying Gerald Finch, she said. A pause. Zuri, I'm telling you, not asking you. The arrangement is done. She stopped in the hallway outside her room. And I'd start thinking about how to restructure that $40 million problem without using me. Because in about 48 hours, Gerald Finch is going to have a different kind of problem, and he's going to be less focused on your business than he is right now. Silence on the line. Then her father's voice, stripped of its careful management. What have you done?
I found another way, she said, like I always do. She hung up and went into her room and sat on the edge of the too-nice bed and put her face in her hands for a moment, not crying, just pressing against the reality of what she'd set in motion. The machinery of it, the man at the center of it. Her phone buzzed one final time that night. The unknown number. A message, not a call. One line. Your grandmother's surgical team has been arranged. Transfer confirmed for tomorrow morning. She sat with the phone in her hands and felt the relief move through her like something physical, cresting and then ebbing, leaving behind it something more complicated. The knowledge that she had accepted help from a man she didn't fully understand, in exchange for a proximity she hadn't agreed to define, and that whatever came next was going to come from a place she couldn't go back from. She had crossed something. She knew it the way you know when a door closes behind you. The question was what was on the other side of it. She found out in stages, the way you find out most things that matter. Not in one clean revelation, but in a series of smaller ones, each one adjusting the picture until the picture was something she hadn't expected to be looking at. Her grandmother's transfer happened the next morning, exactly as the message said. Eleanor Okafor was moved from Grover Memorial in Georgia to the Hargrove Cardiac Institute on the Upper East Side, which Zuri had looked up at 2 a.m. and found listed in 3 separate medical publications as one of the top 5 cardiac centers in the country.
The surgical team assigned to her case had a collective resume that made the doctors back home look like they were still in training. Eleanor had called Zuri from the new room and said, "Baby, there's a window in here the size of a wall." And Zuri had said, "Good," and then had to put the phone down for a moment because her throat had closed. She didn't go to the hospital that first day. She needed to think before she sat across from her grandmother and tried to explain any of this, and she didn't yet have an explanation that held together cleanly. Instead, she walked. New York in December had a particular quality she hadn't anticipated. Not the postcard version, but the working version, all slush and exhaust, and the particular smell of the subway grates when the heat came up through them. She walked from the penthouse down toward Midtown and then kept going, hands in her coat pockets, watching the city operate around her. Food carts and dog walkers, and a man arguing with a parking meter, and 3 teenagers who moved through the crowd like water moving around stone. She was thinking about Tae-jun. Specifically, she was thinking about how he'd looked when he said, "I want to know you better." Not the way men usually said things like that, performing sincerity toward an outcome, laying groundwork. He'd said it like he was doing an inventory, like it was a fact about himself he was reporting rather than a line he was delivering. She'd known enough men who could perform honesty to recognize when someone was doing the real version, and the real version was always less polished. It had rough edges. It acknowledged things that a performance would have smoothed over. She was also thinking about Noah. She called him from a bench near Bryant Park, sitting with her coat pulled tight, watching pigeons negotiate over something near a trash can. "Hey." His voice came through warm as always, that warmth that had always felt like home. "Hey." She paused. "How are things?" "Fine. Busy." A beat. "How are things with you?" "Grandmother's been transferred to New York, better hospital." A longer pause. "How'd you manage that?" The question she'd known was coming. She'd spent the walk working up to an answer, and now that she was here, she found none of them fit right. "I found help," she said. "What kind of help?" "Medical? Financial?" She stopped. "Noah, I need to tell you something." The silence on his end had a different quality now. She could hear him calibrating. "There's a man," she said. "I met him on the train. He's—" She stopped again. "How did you describe Tae-jun?" Dangerous felt accurate but incomplete. Powerful felt like the wrong word too, like calling a storm windy. "He's someone with resources. He's offered to help with the surgery costs. He helped arrange the transfer." "Who is he?" "His name is Kang Tae-jun." Nothing. Then, "The name Kang Tae-jun means something. Should I be looking that up?" "Probably," she said honestly. Another silence. Longer. She could hear Noah's breathing shift slightly. "Zuri, what are you doing up there?" "I'm saving my grandmother's life." "And what is this man getting in return?" "Nothing." The word came out before she could decide if it was true. "Nothing I've agreed to." "That's not the same thing." "I know." The call lasted another 4 minutes and covered no new ground. Noah said he trusted her. He said it in the specific tone men use when they mean the opposite, when they mean I trust you, but I don't trust this and I don't trust him, and I need you to know that without making it an ultimatum yet. She said she understood. She said she'd call him tomorrow. After she hung up, she sat on the bench, and a pigeon walked directly over her left foot without any apparent concern, and she thought, fair enough. She went to see her grandmother that afternoon. Eleanor Okafor was 71, small, with white hair cut close, and hands that had done 30 years of hard work without losing their gentleness. She was sitting up in the hospital bed when Zuri came in, looking at the enormous window with an expression of cautious appreciation. And she turned when she heard the door, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw Zuri, opened like a window thrown wide in summer. "Come here," she said. Zuri came there. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself be held for a moment, her grandmother's thin arms around her shoulders, Eleanor's chin resting on the top of her head the way she'd done since Zuri was 4 years old. "Tell me," Eleanor said. "Tell you what?" "All of it, the part you've been not telling me." Zuri pulled back and looked at her grandmother's face. The cardiologist would have called it compromised, failing, the language of systems breaking down. What Zuri saw was the sharpest pair of eyes she'd ever encountered, and a woman who'd been reading her since birth. She told her. Not all of it. Some of it she didn't have language for yet, and some of it she protected Eleanor from because there was no reason for a woman recovering from a cardiac event to have accurate information about organized crime. But she told her about Winston, about Camille, about Gerald Finch, and the $40 million and her mother's business. She told her about accepting help, and from whom. Eleanor listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Zuri finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "This man on the train," she said finally. "Yes. You kept him alive." "I helped. He helped himself." "And he arranged all of this." Eleanor looked at the room. At the window the size of a wall and the monitoring equipment and the doctor who'd come in earlier and spent 45 minutes reviewing her case like it was genuinely interesting to him. "For what?" "He says because he owes me." "Men with power don't spend it on debts," Eleanor said. "They spend it on interest." Zuri looked at her hands. "I'm not saying he's wrong," Eleanor continued. "I'm saying be careful what you think you're agreeing to." She reached out and covered Zuri's hand with hers. "Your mother had a gift for seeing what people were before they showed it. You got that from her. Trust it." "I don't know what I see when I look at him." "That's new for you." "Yeah." Zuri exhaled. "It is." Eleanor squeezed her hand once and let it go. "The surgery is in 4 days?" "3 now." "Then I'm not going anywhere." She settled back against her pillows with the air of someone who had made a decision. "You go figure out what you've gotten yourself into. I'll be here." Zuri kissed her on the forehead and left. In the hallway, she stood for a moment, pressing her back against the wall, eyes closed. 3 days. She had 3 days before the surgery, and after that, what? Her grandmother would be in recovery. Zuri would have no more concrete, immediate emergency to use as a frame for any of the decisions she'd made. She would have to look at those decisions in the full light and understand what they were. Her phone vibrated. A message, not from the unknown number, but from a Manhattan number she didn't recognize. "Miss Okafor, Gerald Finch. I believe we should speak. I have information about your situation that you do not currently possess. Please call at your convenience. This is time sensitive." She stared at the message. Gerald Finch had her number. She stood in the hospital hallway and thought about that for a long moment. She thought about how her father had it, about how Tae-jun's people had gotten it, some method she'd accepted without asking because the outcome had been help. And now Gerald Finch, the 63-year-old man her father had tried to sell her to, had it too. Her phone number was apparently circulating through her own life without her. She should not call him. She called him. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Okafor, thank you." His voice was different than she'd expected from the brief, awful introduction at the penthouse. Less expansive, more careful. "What do you want?" she said. "A conversation. In person, if possible. I understand if that seems... What do you have to tell me?" A pause, brief. "I have documentation relating to your mother's estate. specifically relating to the manner in which your father transferred assets to himself following her death. Another pause. The transfer may not have been legal. I have reason to believe this because I commissioned research into the matter 18 months ago, before my current arrangement with your father. Zuri's grip on the phone tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because the man you've apparently aligned yourself with is about to acquire my position in your father's debt, Finch said. And when he does, he will have the same documentation I have, and he will use it differently than I intend to. How do you know about Tae-jun? I know many things about Kang Tae-jun. The careful voice stayed careful. That is not a boast. It's a warning. Miss Okafor, your mother's estate, the documents I have, if they become part of what he acquires, they become leverage. Not over your father, over you. The hallway felt suddenly colder. Meet me tonight, she said. She told herself it was intelligence gathering. She told herself she needed to see the documentation, needed to understand what Finch had, and what it meant before Tae-jun's machinery finished the work she'd set in motion. She told herself it was a rational decision made from an informed position. The restaurant Finch named was a quiet Italian place in Midtown. Old money wood paneling and low light and tables far enough apart that conversations didn't carry. He was already seated when she arrived. In person, without her father's penthouse as context, he was less grotesque. Just a large, tired man in an expensive suit who looked like someone who had made a career of getting what he wanted and was currently in the unusual position of not getting it. He had a folder on the table. He didn't open it immediately. I want you to understand, he began, that I am not your enemy. Start with the documents, she said. He opened the folder. The documents were dense, legal, the kind of paperwork that required expertise to fully parse. But even without expertise, certain things were legible. Her mother's name, Diana Okafor Hayes. The dates, 2008, 2009, the year after her mother's death. The business name, transfer documents with signatures that, Finch explained with the neutral air of a man who had paid lawyers to explain it to him, had anomalies. Witness signatures from a notary who had been, at the time of signing, in a different state. An executor's affidavit that referenced a will codicil that no original will contained. Her father had forged documents to transfer her mother's business to himself. Zuri sat across from Gerald Finch and the room did not spin. That was the strange part. She'd expected something more dramatic from her own nervous system. Instead, there was just a deep, terrible stillness, like the moment after a very loud sound when the air hasn't decided what to do yet. How long have you known? She said. 18 months. And you didn't... I used it to structure my lending arrangement with your father. Finch looked at her without flinching. I am not a good man, Miss Okafor. I want to be clear about that up front. I used what I had to get what I wanted. Your father's situation was useful to me. He closed the folder. But I'm not in the business of destroying things either. What your mother built, it has value. Real value. Not just financially. You were going to let my father hand me to you in exchange for that debt, she said. Yes. He didn't look away. I was. I want to own that. I'm owning it. He pushed the folder toward her. These are copies. You can take them. Do what you choose with them. She looked at the folder, then up at him. Why? Because the alternative is watching Kang Tae-jun use them. He leaned back slightly. Miss Okafor, I have been in business in this city for 30 years. I have done business around men like Tae-jun my entire career. I have never encountered one who did something for a woman without having a specific use in mind for her afterward. He let that land. He has told you he wants nothing. That is the most dangerous sentence a man in his position can say. She took the folder. She left the restaurant and stood on the Midtown sidewalk with the folder under her arm and December air cutting through her coat and her mind running a sequence she couldn't stop. Tae-jun's voice saying, I want to know you better. Mrs. Park in the elevator saying, he would be unhappy that I am here. The unknown number, the SUVs, the machinery of him that had moved into her life with the precision of something that had been waiting for an opening. She called Tae-jun. He answered himself this time. No intermediary. The documents from my mother's estate, she said. She heard her own voice, flat, controlled, a voice she used when she was angry enough that the anger rushed into something colder. Did you know about them? A pause.
the kind of pause that was its own answer. Yes, he said. Before or after you offered to help my grandmother? Another pause. Shorter. Before. The sidewalk stayed solid under her feet. She was grateful for that. So you knew my father had forged documents to steal my mother's business, and you didn't tell me. I was gathering complete information before— Don't! The word came out sharp enough that a passing woman looked over. Zuri turned her face away, kept her voice low. Don't tell me about gathering information. You had something that directly affected me, and you made a choice to withhold it. That's not gathering information. That's a decision. Yes, he said again. Why? The pause this time was different. She could hear him on the other end, and there was something in the silence that sounded like him actually thinking rather than calculating. Because if I told you about the documents, your first move would have been to go directly to your father, and your father would have destroyed or transferred them before you could act. I needed time to acquire the position so you would have them. Yes. So you would have leverage. So you would have options. His voice was careful now in a way it usually wasn't. Zuri, those documents, in your hands with proper legal representation, give you a claim to your mother's estate, the entire estate. Not just the business, everything your father has built with her assets in the last 15 years. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. That's a very convenient thing, she said, for you to be handing me. It is not convenient. It is what is right. And is it the only reason you've been— She stopped, reframed. Is my mother's estate part of why you're interested in my situation? The longest pause yet. No, he said. It is not part of it. How do I know that? You don't, he said. That is an honest answer, and I know it is insufficient. She stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Traffic moved past. A bus. 2 taxis. The city ongoing in its gigantic, unconcerned way. I need space, she said. Don't call me. Call me. Don't send anyone. Don't manage my situation for the next 24 hours. All right. I mean it. If I find out someone has been watching or following or— Zuri, his voice was quiet. All right. She hung up. She went back to the penthouse. Her father's penthouse, with its 2 perfect surfaces and its art chosen by someone else, and she sat in the guest room with the folder on the bed in front of her and went through every document slowly, one by one, with her phone open to a legal dictionary and a notepad beside her. By midnight, she had understood most of it. By 1 a.m., she understood all of it. Her mother had built something real. Diana Okafor Hayes, the woman who had died when Zuri was 12, who existed in Zuri's memory as warmth and the smell of shea butter, and a voice that could make even the unpleasant sound manageable. That woman had built a business from nothing over 14 years, and it was worth approximately $90 million, and her husband had stolen it by forging her death documents before the body was in the ground. Zuri put the notepad down. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She stayed like that for a long time. At 2 in the morning, she heard voices from the hallway. Her father and Camille, the low-register sound of an argument in progress, the specific frequency of 2 people who were frightened and taking it out on each other. She caught fragments, Gerald's name, the words irreparably compromised, her own name once, said by her father in a tone she'd never heard from him before, something stripped of the management and the careful diction, something that sounded almost like fear. She opened her door. The hallway went quiet. Her father and Camille stood at the other end of it, both in robes, both caught mid-argument, both looking at her with expressions that told her whatever was coming had arrived faster than they'd expected. Gerald Finch pulled his entire investment portfolio from your company today, she said. Not a question. She'd guessed it from the fragments, from the timing, from the understanding of how Tae-jun operated. All 40 million. Her father stared at her. He also, Zuri continued, contacted his lawyers about the lending arrangement, which means the debt is being called in, which means you have— She did the mental math. 30 days, probably. Maybe 60, if you negotiate. What did you do? Winston said. Again, that stripped quality in his voice. I didn't do anything. She held his gaze. What did you do, Winston? 14 years ago. What did you do to Mom's business? The hallway went so quiet she could hear the building's ventilation system. Camille took a slow step back. Just one.
She, at least, Zuri noted, was not going to pretend she didn't know. Her father's face went through several things in the span of about 4 seconds. Calculation, and then the assessment that calculation would not work here, and then something that was not quite guilt, but was in the same neighborhood. The expression of a man who had lived with a thing so long he'd stopped seeing it and was now being made to see it again. That business kept us solvent, he said. The U.S. was not lost on her. After your mother, don't use her death as a sentence you get to finish your way. Her voice was steady, which surprised her because her hands were shaking slightly where they gripped the doorframe. You forged documents. You stole what she built. And then when your theft wasn't enough to cover what you spent, you tried to sell your daughter. She took a breath. I have copies of everything. Camille made a small sound. Her father looked at her, and for a moment she saw what was underneath the architect of his face. A man who had told himself a story about what he'd done for so long that the story felt more real than the actions. That was the thing about people who did damage without violence. They narrativized it. They made it into something that had been necessary, reasonable, the only available option. Winston Hayes had told himself his story for 15 years, and now someone was standing in his hallway at 2 a.m., holding the evidence, and the story was not landing. What are you going to do? He said. I'm going to get a lawyer, she said. A good one. She looked at him steadily. And then I'm going to decide. She went back in her room and closed the door. She sat on the bed for a moment. Then she picked up the folder and her phone and her bag, and she packed what she'd come with, and she called down to the lobby for a taxi. She was in the elevator when her phone rang. Noah. She answered. Hey. I did what you said. His voice was different, tight. I looked him up. Noah. Kang Tae-jun. I looked him up, Zuri. He's what I found, the things people say about him. He stopped. She could hear him getting control of something. This man is not safe. I know that. You know that, and you're still... I know that, and I'm still dealing with the situation I'm in. The elevator reached the lobby. She walked out, through the marble entrance, out onto the street where the taxi was already pulling up. Noah, my grandmother's surgery is in 2 days. My father stole my mother's entire estate. I have been in this city for 6 days, and I've run out of options that look the way I wanted them to look. Then come home. His voice broke slightly on it. Zuri, come home and we'll figure it out together. We'll find a way. We don't need his money. The surgery is in 2 days. She got into the taxi, gave the hotel address she'd found that afternoon. A modest place in Midtown, out of her father's building and out of anyone's management. There is no other way for the surgery. That is done. I need you to hear that. Silence. And afterward, he said. She looked out the taxi window at the city going past. Afterward, I don't know yet. That's not... He stopped. Zuri, I need you to tell me that you're not... I can't tell you things I don't know, she said. I'm sorry. That's honest, and I'm sorry. The call ended without either of them deciding to end it. She sat in the taxi with the folder on her lap and watched Midtown give way to the quieter blocks near the hotel. She checked in under her own name. The room was small, impersonal, exactly what she needed. A space that belonged to no one with a stake in her situation. She lay on top of the covers without undressing and stared at the ceiling. The surgery was in 2 days. Her grandmother would either make it through or she wouldn't, and Zuri had done everything she could possibly do on the side of her making it. Her mother's business existed as a claim she could pursue. Her father's fraud was documented. Gerald Finch was out of the picture. She had solved the problem she'd come here to solve. She had done it in ways that had brought Kang Tae-jun into her life at a proximity she hadn't agreed to and couldn't now easily reverse. She had done it in ways that had put strain on the one relationship she'd counted on to be her ground. She had done it in ways that had required her to look at who her father was and stop pretending it was something more ambiguous. None of these were small things. She was still working through the inventory of them when her phone buzzed one final time. Not a call. A message. From a number she'd seen before. Not the neutral intermediary, but a number she now recognized as Tae-jun's. One line. I should have told you about the documents when I first had them. I'm sorry. She stared at it. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and closed her eyes. She thought about what Eleanor had said. Men with power don't spend it on debts. They spend it on interest.
She thought about Finch across the restaurant table, the most dangerous sentence a man in his position can say. She thought about a train car and a man on the floor who had looked up at her with steady eyes and said, "Go back to your seat." And she had said no. And every single thing that had followed from that no was currently surrounding her in ways she was still mapping. She thought about Noah's voice saying, "Come home," like it was still available. She turned the phone back over. She typed, "The surgery is in 2 days. I'll be at the hospital." She sent it and waited. His response came in under a minute. "I know. I'll be there." She stared at those 3 words. She hadn't invited him. She hadn't asked. And he hadn't said he'd be in the lobby, or available, or nearby. He'd said, "I'll be there," with the certainty of someone who understood that being there was what the moment required, and who had already decided, somewhere before she'd sent the message, that he intended to be. She should have told him not to come. She turned off the light instead. In the dark of the small, impersonal room, alone with the noise of the city and her grandmother 2 miles away, in a hospital bed and her mother's stolen business in a folder on the floor, and the ruins of her father's careful story scattered back in a penthouse she would not return to, Zuri Okafor lay still and felt the ground shifting under all of it, settling into a new shape she couldn't yet see clearly, and understood, finally, that she was not the same person who had gotten on that train in Atlanta, and that the person she was becoming was going to have to make choices the person she had been could never have imagined. The surgery was scheduled for 7 in the morning. Zuri arrived at the Hargrove Cardiac Institute at 6:15 before the city had fully decided to wake up, when the streets still had that particular pre-dawn quality, empty enough to feel like the world had paused, cold enough that her breath came out in small clouds that disappeared almost immediately. She had the folder in her bag and her grandmother's rosary beads on her wrist, and she had slept maybe 3 hours. The surgical floor waiting room was beige and quiet, and had chairs designed by someone who had never had to wait in them for very long. She sat in one and watched the wall clock and held her own hands in her lap. At 6:40, Tae-jun walked in. He was alone. No intermediaries, no men in dark clothing flanking him, just him in a gray coat moving through the waiting room with the characteristic stillness that she'd noticed on the train, that quality of a large presence that had learned to take up less space than it technically occupied. He saw her immediately. He crossed to where she was sitting and stopped. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would." She looked at him for a moment. He looked tired, she realized. Not the acute exhaustion of injury like she'd seen on the train, but the deeper kind. The kind that lived in the skin around someone's eyes when they'd been running at capacity for too long. She had not thought, until this moment, about what Kang Tae-jun's life cost him on an ordinary day. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know." He sat down 2 chairs away. Not beside her. 2 chairs away, which was the exact right distance, and she didn't know how he'd calculated it, but he had. They didn't speak much. That was the thing she remembered afterward, about those 94 minutes in the waiting room, that they had sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable, and she had not had to perform anything. She had not had to be composed or grateful or clear about what she felt. She had just been a woman in a waiting room who was frightened for her grandmother, and he had just been a man sitting nearby who had decided that nearby was where he should be. At 7:53, a doctor came out and said the surgery was progressing well, and the first stage had gone as planned, and they were into the second stage, which was the most complex, and it would be several more hours. Zuri exhaled. Tae-jun, 2 chairs away, did the same. At 9:15, her phone buzzed. Winston. She stared at his name on the screen for a long moment. "Your father?" Tae-jun said. He was looking at his own phone, not hers, but apparently something in the change of her posture had been readable. "Yes." "You don't have to answer." "I know." She answered anyway. "The lawyer contacted me this morning." Her father's voice was different and again, the stripped quality from the hallway at 2 a.m., but more so now. "Your lawyer. I retained someone last night." She had. A woman named Claire Adeyemi, recommended by 3 different sources when Zuri had done her research at midnight. A civil litigation attorney who had recovered stolen estates in 4 separate high-profile cases, and who had sounded, when Zuri called at 7 a.m., not at all surprised by the circumstances. "This will destroy us," Winston said. "That's a consequence of what you did, not what I'm doing." "Zuri, my grandmother is in surgery right now, Winston." She heard her own voice, how even it was.
Call the lawyer. She hung up. Tae-jun said nothing. She looked at the wall. He forged my mother's documents, she said. Not to Tae-jun particularly. Just saying it, the way you say things that need to be said out loud before they become fully real. She spent 14 years building something, and he spent about 2 weeks stealing it after she was gone. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Then, my father did something similar, different form, same logic. He looked at the middle distance. Men like that tell themselves a story about necessity, about deserving. They repeat it until the story has more substance than the thing they did. She looked at him. What did your father do? He spent everything my mother saved raising us and called it investment. When it was gone, he called her failure and left. He said it with the flat effect of something reported rather than felt. But she'd learned enough in 4 days to know that flat effect was a form of management. I was 15, my brother was 8. And then I found a way to make sure we didn't go without again. He looked at his hands. The way I found was not good. I know that. I made decisions at 15 and 17 and 19 that compounded into the thing I am now. I'm not asking you to approve of it. I'm not approving or disapproving. I'm trying to understand. He looked at her directly. Why? She thought about it. Because you've been in my life for 6 days and you've affected it in ways that don't undo themselves. That deserves understanding. He held her gaze. Most people don't want to understand. They want to be reassured or they want to be frightened. Understanding requires something more. He paused. Inconvenient. Yeah, well, she looked back at the wall. I was raised inconvenient. He almost smiled. She was beginning to recognize the tells. The slight shift at the corner of his mouth, the fractional easing around the eyes. They went back to the silence and the clock and the waiting. The surgery finished at 1:14 in the afternoon. The doctor came out with the expression Zuri had been terrified she wouldn't see. The one that meant the news was good, that the machinery of medicine had done what it was supposed to, that her grandmother's heart had held together through 6 hours and 21 minutes of repair work, and was now doing what hearts were supposed to do, steadily and with intent. She's stable, the doctor said. The procedure went very well. She'll be in recovery for several hours, and then Zuri stopped hearing the specifics. She heard stable and very well, and the rest became a kind of warm noise that she stood inside of, with her eyes burning and her jaw clenched, refusing to cry in a waiting room in front of strangers. She felt a hand close around hers. Brief. Just for a moment. She didn't look down at it. She didn't look at Tae-jun. She just stood in the warm noise of good news and let the hand be there. And then, after a moment, it was gone, and she breathed. Thank you, she said. To the doctor, to the room, to no one specifically. She went in to see her grandmother 2 hours later. Eleanor was gray and tired, and the most beautiful thing Zuri had ever seen. She held her hand for a long time without saying much, and Eleanor drifted in and out of the light sedation. And once when she surfaced, she looked at Zuri and said, Is that man in the hall? Zuri looked up. Through the glass panel beside the door, she could see Tae-jun. He was standing in the corridor, his back to the wall, not looking in, giving them the room's privacy, just present in the way he'd been in the waiting room. Yes, Zuri said. Eleanor turned her head to look, studied him for a moment with her cardiologist-fogged eyes. Then she looked back at Zuri and said, in the particular register that meant she was filing something away for later. Rest, Zuri said. I'm resting. Eleanor closed her eyes. I'm just resting with opinions. Zuri left the hospital at 4:30. Tae-jun walked out with her. They stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon cold, and the situation between them was large and imprecise, and they were both aware of it. Dinner, he said. Not a question, not quite. More like a proposal that was leaving room for a no. She was about to answer when her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number, but not the neutral voice number she'd come to recognize. A different unknown. She answered. Yes. The voice on the other end was male, young, and spoke in English with a Korean accent sharper than Tae-jun's. Miss Okafor, my name is Kang Min-seok. I believe you know my brother. She went still. Beside her, Tae-jun, who couldn't hear the call, noticed the change in her body, and his own stillness changed quality, became more alert. What do you want? She said. A conversation, The voice was pleasant in a way that was worse than hostility. I have been watching my brother's unusual interest in you with great curiosity. He doesn't usually, how to put this, invest in people the way he's invested in you. I want to understand why. Call your brother. I am calling you, Miss Okafor, because you are the variable I find interesting. My brother I understand entirely. A pause. Come have coffee with me tonight, alone. No. That's unfortunate. The pleasantness stayed steady. I had hoped we could discuss this like rational people before it became something more complicated. There's nothing to discuss. Your grandmother's recovery is so encouraging. He said it lightly, just a slight shift in subject. The Hargrove is an excellent facility, excellent security as well. Modern hospitals are very difficult to disrupt, usually. The word dropped into the conversation like something cold. Zuri's heart rate did something she felt in her throat. She kept her face still because Tae-jun was watching her. Say that again clearly so I understand you. I'm saying that complicated situations can become very complicated. The pleasantness was gone now, replaced by something that was simply direct. And I would prefer we speak before that happens. Tonight. I'll send you an address. The call ended. Tae-jun's hand was on her arm before she finished lowering the phone. Who was that? She looked at him. She watched his face as she said the name, Kang Min-seok. The change was immediate and severe. The remaining tiredness in his face evacuated. What replaced it was not anger exactly. It was the closing of several doors at once, the evacuation of everything personal, leaving behind the face she imagined people saw in rooms where Tae-jun was the most dangerous person present. What did he say? The words were clipped, precise, the accent more pronounced. He wants to meet, alone. She stopped, decided on full information. He mentioned my grandmother, the hospital. Tae-jun said something in Korean. She didn't know the words, but she understood the register. It was the sound of a man dealing with a catastrophe he had prepared for and hoped would not arrive. He's been watching us, she said. Yes. He was already on his phone. 2 calls in rapid succession, Korean both times, short and clipped, and clearly instructions being issued. Then he lowered the phone and looked at her. We need to move. Not back to your hotel and not to anywhere I usually use. Min-seok will have coverage on those. He's going to do something. Yes. To my grandmother. Tae-jun met her eyes. He will threaten it to get to me. He would not act on it without... He stopped. Something in the stopping told her he wasn't certain of that. We need to move. They moved. She didn't ask questions in the car. A car she didn't recognize, driven by a man she'd never seen who had appeared at the curb within 4 minutes of Tae-jun's calls. She asked the relevant question. Is my grandmother safe right now? I have people at the hospital already. He was on his phone again. Physical presence. No one goes onto her floor without clearance. How long before? As long as necessary. The car took them to an apartment in Chelsea that had no visible connection to anything she'd seen Tae-jun associated with before. A regular building, middle floors, the apartment inside furnished sparsely, like a place kept for exactly this kind of purpose. Safe house was the word that came to her. She filed it under the growing category of things she was accepting about his world. There were 2 other people there when they arrived. A man Tae-jun called Ji-ho, who was maybe 40, with the kind of physical economy that came from a long career of being ready for things. And Mrs. Park, from the elevator. Zuri looked at her. Mrs. Park looked back with that comprehensive, unhurried assessment. You know what this is, Mrs. Park said, not a question. Min-seok. He's been building toward this for 6 months. Mrs. Park looked at Tae-jun as she said it, which told Zuri she was explaining something Tae-jun had been refusing to believe. The move on you in New Jersey last week. We handled that. That was reconnaissance. He was testing response time. Mrs. Park set a tablet on the kitchen counter showing a map with several marked locations. He has 4 positions that I've identified, possibly more. He is not trying to warn you off. He is trying to take everything, and he wants to use her to get you into a controlled environment to do it. Tae-jun stood looking at the map. The muscle in his jaw moved once. Zuri studied the map over his shoulder. The address he said he'd send me. He's going to send it. Yes. Mrs. Park looked at her. You should not go. I know that. She looked at Tae-jun. What happens if you don't go? He was quiet for a moment. He escalates until I do. Toward my grandmother. Toward anything that moves me. He turned from the map, looked at her directly. He knows you matter. He identified it before I had fully identified it myself. That is the problem with Min Seok. He sees clearly. He uses what he sees. Your own brother. My own brother. He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it heavier. He has reasons. They are not it's completely without basis. Our history is not simple. What did you do to him? The question landed in the room. Jiho looked at the wall. Mrs. Park's expression stayed professional. Tae-jun looked at Zuri for a moment, then looked away. I made him, he said quietly. And then I made him mine. He had no other options because I controlled the options. For years. He exhaled. He is trying to burn the thing I built because he built it too, and was never acknowledged for it. That is the truth of it. She absorbed that. Then there's something to talk about. Not anymore. He moved past talk when he mentioned your grandmother's hospital. Her phone buzzed. The address? As promised. She looked at it. A shipping facility by the water in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Tonight, 11 p.m. She showed it to Tae-jun. He looked at it for a long time. Something was happening behind his eyes, a calculation she couldn't fully read. I'm going to tell you something, she said, and I need you to hear it clearly. He looked at her. I am not going to be used as the reason you walk into something that gets you killed. She held his gaze. If you go there because he's threatening my grandmother, and something happens to you, that is not a trade I agreed to make. It is not your trade to make. Don't do that. Her voice sharpened. Don't reduce me to a bystander in my own situation. I have been inside this for 6 days. I made choices that contributed to you being visible, to us being visible. If Min Seok is using me as leverage, part of how that leverage exists is because of decisions I made. That makes it my situation. Something in his face shifted. The tactical layer dropped just slightly. What are you proposing? He said. I'm proposing that you don't go alone, and that you don't keep me on the outside of whatever the plan is. He looked at her for a long time. Jiho said something in Korean from across the room. She had the sense it was an objection, something about her presence being an additional vulnerability. Tae-jun answered without looking away from her. Short, final. Jiho went quiet. The plan, Tae-jun said to Zuri, is not to go at his invitation and on his schedule. Then what? We go earlier, before he has his position set. We take the location away from him. He looked back at the map. He'll be there before 11 setting up. If we arrive at 9, he'll have some people but not full coverage, Mrs. Park said, following the logic. The advantage shifts. How much does it shift? Zuri said. Enough, Tae-jun said. That's not a number. It's the best number I have. He looked at her. You are not coming to the location. Not from control, from logic. His voice was careful. If you are present, he will use you directly. You become his instrument the moment he can put his hands on you. The leverage he has now is theoretical. I will not make it physical. He held her gaze. I need you somewhere I know you are safe, so that I can do what needs to be done without that weight. She wanted to argue. She built the argument in her head, about agency, about not being managed, about the choices she'd made to be inside this. All of it was true. And also true, she was not Jiho. She was not trained for whatever a Red Hook shipping facility at 9 p.m. involved. And if her presence made it harder for Tae-jun to do what needed to be done, her presence was not brave. It was a liability she was choosing to call autonomy. Where? She said. Here. Mrs. Park stays with you. Mrs. Park nodded once. Zuri looked at Tae-jun. She looked at him the way you look at something you're trying to memorize against a possibility you don't want to name. Come back, she said. He held her gaze. Yes. He and Jiho left at 8:30. The apartment went quiet. Mrs. Park made tea. Zuri sat at the kitchen counter and held the mug and felt the clock move. At 9:40, her phone rang. Tae-jun's number. She answered immediately. What? The voice on the other end was not Tae-jun. Miss Okafor. Min Seok. Still pleasant, still that surface calm. My brother is currently indisposed. I want you to understand that he is alive. For now, his continued condition depends on you. The mug was in her hands. She set it down very carefully. What do you want? She said. Mrs. Park was already across the room, her own phone out. I want you to come to me, Min Seok said. The address you already have. No detours, no calls, no Mrs. Park. A pause. I know she's there. Come alone, Miss Okafor, and my brother gets to keep being alive. You would kill your own brother. I would do what is necessary to stop the machine he built from running over everything it encounters. A pause. The pleasantness had entirely evaporated. 30 minutes. The call ended. Mrs. Park said, Don't. He has him. We don't know who is. He has Tae-jun's phone. That means he has Tae-jun. Zuri was already standing, already moving. What other coverage do you have at that location? Zuri, what coverage? Mrs. Park looked at her for a hard moment. 2 other teams. But if Min Seok's people see them move, then they don't move until I'm inside. She was putting on her coat. Her hands were not shaking. She was aware of this with the same detached attention she'd had on the train, that strange clarity that arrived when the situation was bad enough to burn off everything except the next necessary thing. Tell them to hold and wait for a signal. What signal? I'll figure that out when I get there. She picked up her bag, stopped, looked at Mrs. Park. If something goes wrong, my grandmother is at Hargrove Cardiac. Make sure she doesn't find out what happened until she's stronger. Mrs. Park looked at her with the first fully open expression Zuri had seen from her. Something that was not quite admiration, but was in that territory. You are a very unusual woman. I've been told. She headed for the door. Red Hook at 9:40 at night was all industrial dark and water smell. The particular desolation of a working waterfront that had been half converted and then left mid-conversion, old buildings sitting next to new ones, forklifts parked at angles like someone had walked away from them mid-use. The shipping facility loomed at the end of a narrow access road, lit from the inside with the thin yellow light of industrial fixtures. She walked in. No one stopped her at the entrance. That itself was a message. They'd been expecting her, had opened the door before she reached it. The inside of the facility was vast and cold, metal shelving units creating corridors between crates and equipment, the ceiling high and lost in shadow. Her footsteps echoed. Keep walking. A man she didn't recognize, young, Korean, flanking her without touching her. She kept walking. She heard Tae-jun before she saw him. Not his voice. He wasn't speaking. She heard his breathing, the quality of it, controlled but costing more than it should. She turned a corner between 2 rows of crates and saw him. He was on his knees, not bound. She registered that, noted it, filed it as information. Not bound, which meant he was choosing to be still, which meant he was calculating. His coat was gone, his right shoulder carrying a wound she could see from 10 feet away, a dark stain spreading from just below the shoulder joint. His face was changed. Not the face from the waiting room, not the face from any of their conversations. Everything personal stripped away again, and what was left was harder than anything she'd seen on him. His eyes found her the moment she came around the corner. Something happened in them. Something that looked like the opposite of relief. Like relief's more painful cousin. You shouldn't be here, he said. So I've been told. She didn't go to him. She planted where she was, because going to him would show Min Seok's people exactly what leverage was available. Min Seok was behind him. Standing, dressed simply, his face a younger, sharper version of his brother's. He looked at Zuri with the clear eyes of someone who had anticipated this outcome and found confirmation satisfying. Thank you for coming, he said. Sit down. I'll stand. Something flickered across his face. You are very like he described. He described me. Extensively, uncharacteristically. Min Seok walked around his brother, not touching him, but close enough that the proximity was its own statement. Tae-jun doesn't talk about people. He analyzes them. He strategizes around them. He does not... He paused, choosing the word. Describe them, the way you describe something you keep thinking about. She kept her face still. I want my brother's empire, Min Seok said. Simply. Like a fact, he was reporting. I built half of it. I was 15 when I started running money through 3 different front operations because he asked me to. I was 17 when I took a case that should have been his because he was already too visible and someone needed to not be seen. I built and I ran, and I was good at it, and he acknowledged none of it. The pleasantness was long gone. In its place was something genuine and ugly and human in the way that old wounds were human. He gave me operations. He gave me authority over specific sectors. He gave me, his voice went tight. He gave me exactly as much as he decided I should have, and not 1 inch more, because he could not stop controlling the thing we built together. Tae-jun's jaw worked. He said nothing. You're right, Zuri said. Min Seok looked at her. He told me, she said, tonight, before your call. He told me he made you and then controlled what you could become. He said his reasons weren't completely without basis. She held Min Seok's gaze. He said it like someone who knows what they did. Min Seok stared at her. The gun that had been loose in his hand, she'd been tracking it peripherally, stilled. He said that, Min Seok said. Yes. To you. Yes. Something shifted in the room. She didn't fully understand the shift, but she felt it in the air pressure, in the way 2 of Min Seok's people exchanged a look. It doesn't fix it, Min Seok said, but the steel in his voice had a crack in it now. No, she said. It doesn't fix anything. But it's not nothing. She took 1 step forward, just one. You called me here. You threatened a 71-year-old woman who's recovering from heart surgery to get me here. You shot your brother. She held her ground. What happens now? Burn everything he built? You take it? Then what? You spend the next 15 years doing exactly what he did because the alternative is starting over, and starting over is terrifying? The crack in his voice had spread to his face. He was 30, maybe. In his face right now, she could see the 15-year-old who'd run money through front operations because his brother asked him to. The one who'd never been acknowledged. Put the gun down, she said quietly. Zuri. Tae-jun's voice, low, warning. He's not going to shoot me. She looked at Min Seok. Are you? Min Seok looked at her for a long time. The gun moved. Not toward her. Sideways, then down, then to his side. Then everything happened at once. The door behind her opened and Jiho came through. She hadn't known he was alive, hadn't known he was mobile, and the relief of it hit her like a physical thing. And Min Seok's 2 flanking men moved simultaneously, and the room became noise and motion, and she did the only thing available to her, which was drop to the floor and move toward Tae-jun. She reached him. He was already getting up, already absorbing the pain of it into the same controlled place he put everything that hurt. She got under his good arm, and he accepted the support without comment, because they had done this before, in a different space with different danger, and the muscle memory was apparently transferable. The exit is left, he said against her ear, low and urgent. Second corridor. Don't run. If I don't run, running tells them where to aim. Move steadily. Now. She moved steadily. She focused on the floor in front of her, 20 feet, 15, 10. And behind her the sounds of the room were the sounds of people who were very good at violence, doing it efficiently. And she did not look back, because looking back was not in the plan. They went through the exit door into the cold, water-smelling dark, and Tae-jun's breathing was bad, worse than the train, and she felt the warmth of blood from his shoulder through her coat sleeve, and she thought about distance and time, and how far they needed to go. 2 of Mrs. Park's people materialized from the dark to the left. She felt Tae-jun exhale something that might have been relief if it hadn't been so compressed. My brother, he said to the nearest man. Contained, the man said. Minor injuries. His people are standing down. Tae-jun stopped walking. She felt it through the arm across her shoulders. The sudden stillness of someone whose body has reached a limit and is notifying them. She looked at his face. Gray under the cold light, jaw clenched, the careful control starting to fracture at the edges. You need a doctor, she said. Yes. Right now. Yes. He looked down at her. His eyes were doing what they'd done on the train floor, that steadiness in the middle of the damage. You walked into that building alone. Someone had to. I had people outside. Min Seok knew about your people. He said as much. She kept her arm around him, felt the warm press of his blood against her sleeve. I was the only unknown variable he hadn't planned for. He looked at her for a long moment in the dark and the cold with the sounds of the waterfront around them and his blood on her coat. You could have been killed, he said. You were shot. I heal. So do I. She held his gaze. I'm harder to damage than I look. You of all people should know that by now. Something broke open in his face then. Not the tactical doors closing, not the evacuation of the personal. The opposite. She watched the wall come down, and what was behind it was complicated and raw and entirely without performance. He said her name. Just her name. The way he'd said it on the train platform, like he was confirming she was real. "I know," she said. She didn't know exactly what she was answering. She meant it anyway. The car arrived 30 seconds later, and they got in, and she held the pressure against his shoulder in the dark of the back seat, while the city moved past the windows, and he sat very still and let her. And the rosary beads were still on her wrist, and her grandmother's heart was beating somewhere across the river, steady and repaired. And Zuri thought about a door you went through and couldn't go back through, and thought about how sometimes the thing on the other side of it was the thing you didn't expect. That was the thought she finished in the back of the car, holding pressure against Tae-jun's shoulder while the city moved past the windows. That sometimes the thing on the other side of the door you couldn't go back through was not what you'd feared. Sometimes it was just the next true thing, the one you'd been walking toward without knowing it. She didn't say that out loud. There was too much blood on her hands for philosophy. The doctor arrived at the Chelsea apartment 17 minutes after they did. Not a hospital. Tae-jun had been clear about that in the car, his voice compressed but functional. A man issuing instructions while his body sent urgent messages he was choosing not to prioritize. The doctor was a woman in her 50s named Yoon, who came with a case in the manner of someone who had done this particular work before and had long since stopped asking certain questions. She looked at the wound, looked at Tae-jun, and said something in Korean that made Ji-ho, who had arrived separately and was already there when they walked in, exhale with what sounded like relief. "Through and through," Yoon said in English, for Zuri's benefit or simply from habit. "The bone is cracked but intact. He'll have restricted use for several weeks." "He'll manage," Tae-jun said. "You'll manage less than you think," Yoon said, already opening her case. "Sit down and stop talking." He sat down. He stopped talking. Zuri noted that he obeyed the doctor with a completeness he didn't extend to most instructions and filed it away as one more piece of him that didn't fit the surface image. Zuri washed her hands in the kitchen sink. The water ran pink and then clear. She stood at the sink after it ran clear, hands under the water, just standing there for a moment. Mrs. Park appeared beside her with a towel. "Min Seok?" Zuri said. Contained. His remaining people stood down once he told them to. Mrs. Park handed over the towel. He told them to. Zuri absorbed that. He could have kept going. Yes. But he stopped. Yes. Mrs. Park looked at her with that comprehensive steadiness. Something changed in the room before Ji-ho came through the door. His people said he just stopped. She paused. "That was you." Zuri dried her hands. "I just talked to him." "You said what needed saying." Mrs. Park's voice held something that might have been the closest it got to warmth. "That is not a small thing." Zuri put the towel down and went back to the main room. Yoon was finishing the dressing on Tae-jun's shoulder, efficient and unimpressed by her patient's attempts to project that the whole thing was a minor inconvenience. He was shirtless under the clinical lighting, and she could see the other scars on his body, the landscape of 15 years of decisions compounded. The record of the thing he'd built written in scar tissue across his back and ribs, and one long clean line along his left forearm that she hadn't noticed before. She noticed it now. She looked at it for a moment and something moved in her chest, slow and heavy, like a wave that had been traveling a long distance. He caught her looking. He didn't look away or cover it. "Sit down," she said, "please. You're making it worse standing like that." He sat. Yoon finished, repacked her case, gave instructions about the dressing that Zuri memorized because Tae-jun would not, and left. Ji-ho followed her out, which Zuri suspected was not accidental. Mrs. Park at some point had also disappeared from the room, and she had the distinct impression that the apartment had been cleared deliberately. They were alone. Tae-jun sat on the couch in the spare, clean room with his shoulder dressed and his face showing the cost of the evening more than he'd let it show while there were other people to see it. Not weakness, just the thing that happened when a person stopped performing maintenance for a moment. He looked tired in the way that was cumulative, years of it. Zuri sat in the chair across from him. They were quiet for a moment. "The scar on your forearm," she said. He looked at it. "That one is old." "How old?" "I was 19. He looked up at her.
There was a situation I mishandled. I was learning. Is that what you call it? That's what it was. Romanticizing it doesn't help anyone. He shifted slightly, adjusted to the shoulder's new instructions about what movement was permitted. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about my grandmother's surgery being paid for, and my mother's estate being in a lawyer's hands, and my father's fraud being documented, and my grandmother's rosary beads still being on my wrist, she said. I'm thinking about a man who bled on a train floor and told me to go back to my seat, and I didn't. She looked at her wrist, at the beads. I'm thinking about all the things I came to New York not knowing, and how many of them I now know. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with knowing them. He was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what the city always did, its enormous, impersonal ongoing. Somewhere across the water, her grandmother's heart was beating in a body that had been repaired by hands Tae-jun had arranged, in a hospital room with a window the size of a wall. Min Seok, she said. Yes. What happens to him? Tae-jun's jaw worked. That is something I have to decide. He's your brother. I know what he is. Then you know that what he said tonight wasn't wrong. She looked at him. About being controlled. About not being acknowledged. You told me yourself. I know. The two words landed with weight. So what happens to him? A long pause. What would you have happened? I'm not the one to ask. I am asking you. She looked at him. The steadiness in his eyes was there, always there, that bedrock quality. But underneath it right now was something more exposed. A man who had controlled things for 15 years sitting with a question that control couldn't answer. Let him build something of his own, she said. Cut him out of what you run. Give him whatever is actually his and make the line clean. Don't absorb him back in and don't destroy him. She paused. He's 30 years old and angry. That's recoverable. But only if there's space to recover in. Tae-jun looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she couldn't entirely read. You're proposing I restructure my organization based on the moral analysis of a woman I met on a train 9 days ago, he said. I'm proposing you do the thing that doesn't require you to either forgive everything or destroy everything, she said. There's a middle. People don't use it enough because it requires actually thinking. The almost smile. The one she'd learned to look for. You are very unusual, Zuri. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. She looked at her hands in her lap, looked at the rosary beads, then up at him. I need to tell you something. Tell me. Noah and I ended things. She said it flatly, because the flatness was honest. It had been flat. The calls she'd made from the hospital corridor while Tae-jun was being doctored. The conversation that had lasted 11 minutes and contained very little shouting because Noah was not a person who shouted. He was a person who went quiet in the specific way that meant something was being decided. He had said, I can hear it. She had said, I'm sorry. He had said, I know. And then, take care of yourself, Zuri. And she had said, you too. And that had been that. 11 years of knowing each other, two of them engaged in the loose way she'd never examined closely enough, ended on a hospital corridor floor in 11 minutes because she had finally stopped pretending she knew what she was walking toward. Last night, while you were... She gestured at his shoulder. I called him. Tae-jun was very still. I'm not telling you that as anything, she said. I'm telling you because you've been honest with me about difficult things, and that's the only currency I know how to use back. She looked at him steadily. I'm not ready for anything that resembles what I think you want. I don't know how long that's true for. I might not be the right person for what your life is. I don't know your world well enough yet to know if I could survive inside it. You survived the last 9 days, he said quietly. I survived them at significant cost. She held his gaze. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time to stand on ground that isn't moving before I make decisions about what I want to be standing on. He looked at her for a long moment. The room was quiet. The city was outside. Understood, he said. And then carefully, I can wait. Don't wait. Live your life. I'll live mine. She paused. And then we'll see what that looks like. He nodded. Once. It had the quality of an agreement made between equals, which was the only kind she'd ever been able to honor. She left the apartment at 1 in the morning and took a car back to the hotel. Her own arrangements, her own car service, her own money,
which was barely adequate for the purpose, and she didn't care. She needed to do that one thing under her own power. She lay in the small impersonal hotel room, and for the first time in 9 days, she slept through the night without her mind running inventory. The next 2 weeks were not simple. Nothing that followed was going to be simple, and she had made her peace with that. The lawyer, Claire Adeyemi, moved with efficient precision through the documentation Finch had provided. Winston's forgeries were, as Finch had suggested and the documents confirmed, thorough but not thorough enough. The kind of fraud that worked fine for years until someone with the right expertise looked directly at it, which no one had, because no one with resources had ever had reason to look. Claire looked. Claire found 17 specific points of documented forgery across 6 instruments. She filed with the civil court on a Thursday morning and told Zuri the process would take months, possibly longer, and that Winston's attorneys would fight it and that they would lose. Zuri called her father that afternoon. He answered. She hadn't been sure he would. "I'm not doing this to destroy you," she said. It was important to her that he understood that, even if he didn't believe it. "Mom built something real. It should have come to me. You took it, and I'm taking it back. That's all this is." Winston was quiet for a moment. "And what am I supposed to do?" "I genuinely don't know," she said. "Figure out what you're supposed to do. That's work I can't do for you." Another silence. Then, in a voice she'd never heard from him, stripped of everything, just the voice of a man who was tired. "She would have been angry with me." "Yes," Zuri said, "she would have been." She let him sit with that and ended the call. Camille filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Zuri found out from a news item, briefly, and moved on. Her grandmother recovered in stages, the way the body insists on its own timeline. Eleanor Okafor had been a strong woman her whole life, and strength, her cardiologist explained, was both what had gotten her to 71 with an undiagnosed condition and what would carry her through the recovery. She was in the New York facility for 3 weeks, and then Zuri arranged her transfer back to Georgia, to a rehabilitation center 40 minutes from their town that was significantly better than anything previously available to them. The week before Eleanor left New York, Zuri sat with her in the hospital room for a whole afternoon. They didn't talk about the legal case or Winston or anything that had happened in the machinery of the last month. They talked about her mother, about Diana, who had been Eleanor's daughter, and about what she had been before she was a memory. She was not easy, Eleanor said, which was the highest compliment she gave most people. She made things hard on herself on purpose. She thought easy things were suspicious. "I know where I get it," Zuri said. Eleanor smiled. The first real smile Zuri had seen from her since before the surgery. The kind that lived in the whole face. "The man, the Korean man, he visited." Zuri looked at her. "When?" "Last Tuesday. You weren't here." Eleanor's eyes were steady on her. "He sat in that chair for 40 minutes. He didn't say much. He asked me about your mother. I asked him why he wanted to know." She paused. "He said because you loved her and he wanted to understand the people you loved." Something moved in Zuri's chest. The slow, heavy wave again. "What did you tell him?" she said. "The truth." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "I told him Diana was a woman who built things from nothing and never asked anyone to admire it, and that she died before she got to see what her daughter was going to become." She looked at Zuri. "And he said quietly that he thought he had some idea of what that was." Zuri looked out the big window, the city beyond it, gray December sky going toward the water. "Baby," Eleanor said. "I know. Do you?" "I'm working on it." Eleanor said nothing. She reached out and covered Zuri's hand with hers, and they sat like that while the afternoon light moved across the room. The legal case moved forward. The civil court accepted the filing. Winston's attorneys responded as Claire had predicted, aggressively, with delay as a primary tactic. Claire was not deterred by this. She had, she told Zuri, faced longer delays on thinner cases and found them clarifying. The case would take 18 months, possibly 2 years. At the end of it, Zuri's claim on her mother's estate was strong enough that even a partial recovery would amount to something transformative. In the meantime, she had a life. She moved back to Georgia in January. She couldn't afford New York and didn't want to stay in it. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. She took back the apartment she'd shared with her grandmother, kept the lights on with the waitressing job, drove 40 minutes twice a week to sit with Eleanor during her rehabilitation sessions. She cooked badly and improved slowly. She ran in the mornings on roads she'd known since childhood and let the familiar ground remind her what ground felt like when it wasn't moving. She and Tae-jun talked twice a week. Not about anything large, not about the case or his business or the shape of what they might eventually be to each other. He told her about a documentary he'd watched about migratory birds, and he couldn't fully explain why he'd watched it. And she told him about a regular at the bar named Earl who had been ordering the same meal on Wednesdays for 22 years and seemed genuinely happy. He listened to her the way she'd noticed he listened to things he was actually interested in, completely, without filling the pauses. Once she asked him about Min Seok. "We spoke," he said. "Twice now." And? And it is difficult, in the way that honest things are difficult. A pause. "I gave him the logistics operations in the Midwest, his legitimate side through a subsidiary, clean, his to build." Another pause. "He didn't say thank you." "Did you expect him to?" "No." And then quietly, "I expected him to take it. He took it." "That's something," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. I think it is something." She told him in February about the scar she'd noticed on his forearm. Not asking about it again, she'd asked once and gotten the answer. She told him that she'd thought about it after that night, about the landscape of someone's body as a record of their choices, and that she'd noticed her own hands had calluses from years of bar work, and a small scar on her left thumb from a bread knife when she was 17, and that these were also a record. "Yes," he said. "I'm not the same person I was before the train either," she said. "No one who chooses to open a door stays the same afterward," he said. "That's almost philosophical. I've been spending time with someone who makes me think more carefully." She smiled at her phone in the dark of her Georgia apartment, Eleanor's rosary beads still on her wrist, and outside the window. Her small town was doing what small towns did at 11 p.m. Going quiet, lights going out, the night settling. The day the civil court issued its preliminary ruling in her favor, not the final resolution, but the critical procedural finding that confirmed the forgery and established the inheritance claim as legitimate. Claire called her at 7 in the morning, and Zuri stood in her kitchen in socks and an old sweatshirt and listened to the news and felt something release in her chest that she hadn't fully known was locked. She called Eleanor first. Eleanor said, "Good." Your mother would say good. And then, "Go call that man." Don't gran me. Go call him." She called Tae-jun. He answered on the first ring, which she'd come to understand meant he'd been expecting the call. "The preliminary ruling," he said. Not a question. "Yes." She was leaning against her kitchen counter, the same counter where she'd eaten cereal this morning and where the coffee was still going and where a notepad had her grocery list on it. The ordinary things. "We got it." A pause on his end. When he spoke again, his voice had something in it she'd only heard a few times, the sound of something genuine surfacing through the management. "Good," he said. "That is very good." "Thank you," she said, "for the surgical team, for Mrs. Park, for all of it. You don't... I know I don't have to. I want to." She looked out her kitchen window at the Georgia morning. "I kept you alive on a train. You've been keeping me alive in about every other way since. I think we're even now." A beat. "Are we?" "Starting from even," she said. "Going forward from even." She heard him breathe, the specific quality of a breath that was something other than oxygen management. "When?" he said. The word had significant weight for being just one syllable. She looked out the window, at the town she knew like her own hands, at the road that ran past her building and curved toward the highway that led toward Atlanta, that led toward the airport, that led toward everywhere. "Summer," she said. "Come in the summer. I'll be here." "I'll come in the summer," he said. She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment. Then she poured her coffee and went to the window and let the morning be a morning. Spring arrived the way it always did in that part of Georgia. Suddenly, insistently, green forcing itself through everything that had been bare. Eleanor came home in April, not to full capacity, but to enough, walking with a cane she hated and an attitude toward the cane that made her cardiologist simultaneously exasperated and relieved. She moved back into the apartment. She and Zuri rebuilt their routine around her recovery. Slower mornings, earlier evenings, The particular companionship of two people who knew each other entirely and found it sufficient. Zuri got her paralegal certification in May. She'd been taking the online course since January, 2 nights a week after her shifts, sitting at the kitchen table with Eleanor, sometimes asleep in the next room, and the course material on her screen and the strange satisfaction of learning something that connected to something real. Claire Adiemi's office had told her, obliquely, that they'd be interested when she finished. She'd heard the oblique and filed it. The case continued its forward motion. Winston, in the end, did not fight forever. His attorneys fought for 13 months, and then, in a settlement conference in March of the following year, Winston Hayes sat across a table from Zuri and Claire and said he wanted to resolve it. He looked, by then, like a man who had been carrying something too long and had developed the posture of the weight. He was not contrite. He was too constructed for contrite. But he was finished. He accepted the terms. He signed the documents. He looked at Zuri once, at the end, and said, "She would have been proud of you." And Zuri looked at him and said, "I know," and didn't say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying. She walked out of that conference room into a March afternoon and stood on the sidewalk outside Claire's Midtown office. She'd taken the train up, the same overnight Amtrak, the same car, some stubborn impulse to close the circle. And she stood in the afternoon with her coat open and her face toward a sky that was trying to decide between clouds and sun, and she breathed. Tae-jun had come in August, as promised. He had come to Georgia, which was not something she'd expected him to adapt to naturally, and which he had adapted to with the focused attention he brought to most things. He'd arrived on a Tuesday, no entourage, a single bag, and she'd picked him up from the airport in the 12-year-old car she'd been driving for 4 years, and he had gotten in without comment. She'd driven him through town, shown him the roads she ran in the morning, the bar where she worked, the rehabilitation center where Eleanor was at that point doing her physical therapy. She'd taken him to meet Eleanor. Eleanor had looked at him for a long moment, sitting in her chair in the rehabilitation center's garden, and then she'd said, "You're the one who came to the hospital." "Yes," Tae-jun said, "and asked about my daughter." "Yes." Eleanor studied him. He did not look away or shift. He let himself be studied the way he did most things, with the patience of someone who understood that this was what the moment required. "You have," Eleanor said finally, "the kind of face that has seen too much too early." "Yes," he said again. "So did she." Eleanor meant Zuri's mother, which both of them understood. She got over it by building things. Took her a long time, but she got over it. She looked at him steadily. "What are you building?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on that," he said. Eleanor looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded, once, the way she nodded when a matter had been settled to her satisfaction, and turned to Zuri and said, "Bring me some of that coffee from the machine, the real one, not the decaf they keep trying to give me." Tae-jun stayed for 5 days. They did not do dramatic things. They drove to the coast one day and walked on a beach that was not Busan, and he told her about Busan anyway, the color of the water, the particular way the light fell in the afternoon, a market near the docks where his grandmother had taken him when he was small, before everything complicated. She listened without filling the pauses. She understood now that the pauses were where the real information lived. She told him about her mother, about the textile business. She'd been learning the history of it through the legal process, through documents and records, and it had turned out to be a remarkable thing, built methodically over 14 years, the kind of operation that only existed because someone had refused to let obstacles determine the outcome. She told him she was going to learn it, that when the estate came to her, she wasn't going to sell it. She was going to understand it first and then decide. "You'll be good at it," he said. "I don't know that yet." "I know it." He looked at the water. "I have some experience identifying people who are good at building things." She looked at him, at his profile against the coastlight, the jaw and the brow, and the steadiness that was his most constant feature, at the scar on his forearm visible below his rolled sleeve. "Tae-jun," she said. "Yes." "I'm not afraid of your world anymore." He turned to look at her. "That is not necessarily a safe thing." "I know what your world is," she said. "I know the edges of it. I'm not afraid of the edges." She held his gaze. "I'm also not inside it. I have my own." "I know. And I need that to stay true." "Yes." He said it without qualification. "I know." She looked at him for another moment. The wind came off the water and pushed her hair sideways, and she didn't fix it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They watched the water for a while. Two people standing on a Georgia beach in August, the summer heat finally breaking toward evening, the horizon doing what horizons did, staying exactly where it was no matter how far you walked toward it, which was not discouraging when you thought about it right. Some things were supposed to be aimed at rather than reached. The aiming was its own work. The second wedding, because there was a second one, and it was nothing like the description in any story about powerful men and the women they claimed, which was appropriate because this was not that story, happened on a Saturday in late October, 2 years after the overnight train from Atlanta. Small. Georgia first, Eleanor's garden, which had been coaxed back to something remarkable over the course of the summer, and then a dinner in the evening that fit 30 people with room to spare. Claire Adeyemi came. Mrs. Park came, which surprised Zuri until she thought about it, and then didn't. Jiho came and sat in the back row and looked profoundly uncomfortable with the folding chair and the flowers and the whole occasion, which Eleanor found so amusing that she talked about it for weeks afterward. Minseok did not come, but he sent something, a note, not a card, a single piece of paper with a handful of sentences in Korean that Tae-jun read and then folded and put in his pocket and did not explain, and the expression on his face when he put it in his pocket was something she filed as private and didn't ask about. Noah sent a text the morning of the wedding that said, "Heard through the grapevine. Be happy, Zuri." She read it twice and replied, "You too, Noah," and meant it. The ceremony itself was not elaborate. They had written what they wanted to say themselves, which had been harder than either of them had anticipated and better for the difficulty. Tae-jun spoke first, and what he said was not a performance of sentiment. It had the quality of his best honesty, which was to say it acknowledged what it cost and refused to hide the cost. He said he had spent 15 years believing that the only protection worth having was the kind you built with force, and that she had shown him, without trying and without being asked, that there was another architecture available. He said he did not intend to dismantle what he had built, but he intended to build something in addition that was different in kind. He said he understood that she was not inside his world and did not need to be, and that this was not a limitation. It was the condition that made it possible for her to see him clearly, and being seen clearly was something he had never had before and had not known to want. She spoke second. She had worked on it for weeks and thrown out 3 drafts and finally written it the night before in 20 minutes at the kitchen table with Eleanor asleep in the next room. She said she had gotten on a train because she had no other options and found one she hadn't expected. She said she had learned the difference between protection and control, and that Tae-jun was one of the few people she'd met who understood the difference without being taught it. She said her mother had built something from nothing, and she was going to do the same, and she wanted a witness to that, and she wanted the witness to be him. She said she was not afraid of his world, and she was not afraid of hers, and she was not afraid of him. She said that was enough to start. Eleanor, in the front row, was doing what she did when she was moved and unwilling to admit it. She was studying a point in the middle distance with great concentration, and her jaw was set and her eyes were bright. They exchanged rings, plain ones chosen from a jeweler in town that Eleanor had used for 40 years, which felt right in a way neither of them had articulated, but both had agreed on when they saw them. The afternoon light came through the garden at the angle that October light found in Georgia, long and amber and specific to that latitude and season, the kind of light that made everything look like it had been waiting to be seen in exactly this way. It fell across Eleanor's garden, across the faces of 30 people who had, through different routes and for different reasons, ended up in the same October afternoon. Zuri held Tae-jun's hands and looked at his face and saw what she had learned to see there. The steadiness, always, and beneath the steadiness, the man she'd put pressure on when he was bleeding, the man who had visited her grandmother and asked about her mother, the man who had sat 2 chairs away in a hospital waiting room and calculated the exact right distance to offer without imposing. The man who had said, "I can wait," and then not waited passively, but had lived his life alongside hers, parallel, patient, present. She had not come to New York to find this. She had come to New York because her grandmother was dying, and her father had made a promise, and she had had no other move. She had walked through a connector door because someone needed somebody, and she was there. She had made decisions that compounded into other decisions the way decisions did, and the decisions had cost her and changed her and left her someone different on the other side. But different was not the same as lost. She was not lost. She was, for the first time in a long time, precisely where she was, which was here, in this garden, in this light, with her grandmother's eyes bright in the front row, and 30 people who had traveled different roads to the same afternoon, and a man whose hands were warm and steady and known. The feared and powerful Kang Tae-jun, who had built an empire on the principle that force was the only architecture, stood in an October garden in Georgia and let himself be seen completely, not as the man who controlled things, not as the man people said carefully in certain rooms, but as the man who had sat on the floor of a train connector with his blood on his shirt and looked up at a woman who had refused to walk past him and had never fully recovered from the fact of her. This was not a rescue story. It was not a story about a powerful man and the woman he claimed, or a poor girl and the empire she married into. It was a story about two people who had arrived at the same moment from very different directions and recognized, without fully understanding why, that the recognition itself was worth something, that it was worth stopping for, worth bleeding for, worth sitting in hospital waiting rooms for and walking into shipping facilities for and telling hard truths in courtrooms for. Worth choosing. Eleanor watched her granddaughter stand in the October light and exchange words with a man who looked at her the way people looked at things they did not intend to waste, and she pressed her lips together and said nothing, and the rosary beads that had been on Zuri's wrist for 2 years caught the amber light, and the afternoon went on around them, warm and full and not simple, and completely, precisely, enough.